Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into what I think is one of the most massive contradictions at the heart of the global energy transition. We're unpacking a really comprehensive policy brief from the Chinton Research Foundation and Ashoka University that explores a truly fascinating challenge. Because, what happens with India's massive energy demands doesn't just affect them. It literally dictates whether the entire world can actually hit its global climate goals. We're looking at India's great coal paradox, and how a historically dirty energy source might just be the pragmatic bridge we need to reach a sustainable future.
So here's a seemingly impossible question for you. How on earth do you reach net zero while doubling your coal demand? It sounds completely counterintuitive, right? India has formally committed to achieving net zero emissions by the year 2070. Yet, according to the models in our source material, its thermal coal demand is projected to absolutely soar to 1,758 million tons by 2047. That is nearly double their current demand. This right here is the paradox we're unpacking today.
To put things into perspective, right now, a staggering 70% of India's electricity generation relies directly on coal. But hey, it's not just about keeping the lights on. Coal is literally the bedrock of their industrial growth. It supports hard-to-abate sectors like steel and cement, and provides roughly 13 million direct and indirect jobs. Plus, since 90% of the coal they use is sourced domestically, it provides critical energy security. It essentially shields the country from all those crazy fluctuations in international fuel markets. And you know what? That reliance is only going to grow. India has this very ambitious goal to become a fully developed nation, a Viksit Bharat by 2047. To fuel that massive economic and infrastructural growth, their power requirements are going to skyrocket. We're talking about a jump from 1.7 trillion units of electricity consumed today to a staggering 7.1 trillion units by 2047. Even if they aggressively expand renewable energy, the sheer baseload power needs will still be immense. Now, you might be wondering, why such a massive jump? Well, despite those huge national numbers, India's per capita electricity consumption is currently only 1,395 kilowatt hours. That is significantly below the global average of 3,474 kilowatt hours. For India to truly modernize, industrialize, and support emerging power-hungry sectors like electric vehicles and massive data centers, they simply need to generate a whole lot more power per person.
So this brings us to Section 1. What exactly is coal gasification?
Basically, at its core, coal gasification is a process where you convert coal into a synthetic gas, often called syngas, through partial oxidation at really high temperatures and pressures. But the real magic here is in the last part of that definition. It avoids traditional combustion. By skipping the burning process entirely, you heavily reduce local air pollutants like sulfur and nitrous oxide. And better yet, it opens the door to managing greenhouse gas emissions much, much more effectively. Let's walk through exactly how this works, step by step, no PhD required. First up, you extract the raw coal. Second, instead of just throwing it into a standard thermal furnace to burn it, you feed it into a gasifier. Here, you apply intense heat and pressure in a very controlled, oxygen-limited environment. Third, this chemical reaction produces our syngas, along with a whole host of highly valuable byproducts. It really represents a fundamental chemical shift in how we extract value from this resource. Visually, it's a night and day transformation for the industry. On one side, you have the dirty, dusty reality of raw coal extraction, heavy machinery tearing into the earth. But on the other side, we get a glimpse of the future, the high-tech, highly controlled, clean environment of gasification towers. It elevates coal from being just a simple combustible rock into a highly complex chemical feedstock. Moving right along to Section 2, the byproducts and potential. This is where it gets really interesting, because this process isn't just about electricity. Gasification can actually save critical Indian industries from relying on volatile international imports. Just look at this breakdown. You get hydrogen, which is absolutely essential for clean fuel and ammonia-based fertilizers. You get methanol, which is critical for active pharmaceutical ingredients. That's a huge game changer since India's pharma sector relies heavily on imported APIs right now. The syngas itself can be used in steelmaking to replace traditional coal. And dimethyl ether, or DME, can be blended with LPG to make a synthetic fuel. It essentially creates an entire self-sufficient industrial ecosystem. Okay, so if this tech is such a silver bullet, why aren't we seeing it absolutely everywhere? That brings us to Section 3, roadblocks to commercial scale. Well, the biggest technological hurdle starts with a really stark ratio, 3.5 to 1. You see, domestic Indian coal has an incredibly high ash content, sometimes ranging from 30% all the way up to 45%. Because of this pretty poor quality, it takes roughly 3.5 to 4 tons of raw Indian coal just to yield 1 single ton of usable, clean coal for the gasification process. That is a massive logistical bottleneck, and frankly, imported technologies just aren't designed to handle it efficiently. And that one issue, it triggers a whole cascade of immense socioeconomic and technological hurdles. That high ash content means heavy, expensive processing. The gasification process itself requires a ton of water, generating massive amounts of wastewater and carrying the very real threat of groundwater contamination. Plus, you have millions of tons of coal slag to dispose of. On top of all that, building these complex plants takes 5 to 7 years. And right now, there's just a distinct lack of proven, large-scale commercial models in India to inspire investor confidence. All of this leads to some serious financial fragility. As this quote from an NTPC sensitivity analysis bluntly puts it, project IRR is most sensitive to the cost of capital. In plain English, the upfront capital costs to build these high-tech plants are astronomical. Because they take up to 7 years to build before they generate a single rupee of profit, their success or failure is extremely sensitive to borrowing rates.
So how exactly does India overcome all of these massive roadblocks to hit its target of 100 million tons of coal gasification by 2030? Let's dive into Section 4, Blueprint for the Future.
The very first major policy recommendation from the brief is pretty straightforward. Grant these projects official infrastructure status. Doing this would immediately de-risk investments. It would drive down that vital cost of capital we just talked about, allow these projects to align with the national infrastructure pipeline, and unlock the essential long-term, low-interest financing they desperately need in the early stages. Next up, the brief emphasizes that we really need to aggressively incentivize joint ventures. Look, private companies are just not going to shoulder these astronomical risks by themselves. It's too much. They need to partner with massive public sector undertakings to share the financial burden, pool their operational expertise, and lower overall capital expenditure. It has to be a collaborative approach to get this whole industry off the ground. On the tech side of things, scientists absolutely must develop processes tailored specifically for India's high ash coal, maybe by blending it with things like petcoke, and crucially, they have to deeply integrate carbon capture, utilization, and storage systems. We can't just buy a plug-and-play system from abroad and expect it to work miracles on Indian coal. We need indigenous innovation to handle the ash and ensure the carbon is captured before it ever hits the atmosphere. Which really leaves us with one final, kind of provocative question, perfectly summarizing the paradox. Is the world genuinely ready to accept clean coal as a necessary bridge to a green future? As this explainer highlights, balancing massive developmental needs with vital global climate goals requires complex, highly technical, and sometimes uncomfortable solutions. The coal story is far from over, but how the next chapter is written is going to change everything. Thanks so much for joining me as we unpack this fascinating blueprint.